Okay, since we're all here now, look at this giant crowd, no audience. I welcome everybody to our first of three budget meetings, official budget meetings that we're under. I'll start by acknowledging that we're on the traditional territories of the Coast and Strait Salish people, the Kwungan-speaking people known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations, and that their connections to these lands continue to this day. Also want to point out that we will be, I believe, streaming these as is our want. So all of this meeting will be recorded, it'll be live streamed as well as available afterwards for archives. So just watch our language. And with that, we have a pretty simple piece here. We're going to go through our budget for Parks, Recs, and Culture. And I'm assuming I'm going to hand this over to, I'm not sure who the best person, Ray, are you going to be sort of running lead on this? I'll hand it over to you to do an overview and we'll get into it. Thank you.
Your Worship, can I just jump in just for a sec? Because I just want to recognize Ray and the staff at Parks and Rec. They've gone through a lot of changes this past year with staff, and that's posed some increased work on them. And I'd just like to recognize them for doing that. So thank you to all of you for your work over this past while, because I know it's been a hurdle kind of completing your budget. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Jones. It didn't occur to me. It occurred to Councillor Nave, but she's right, that we should just go around the table and introduce ourselves, because there's some faces here that probably haven't been through this before and don't necessarily know the members of the Parks, Recs, and Culture Commission. So why don't we do that? Councillor Nave, why don't you start? We should use the microphone, so just so people at home.
Tara Ney with the council.
Esther Patterson on council.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Zelka. I'm a councillor.
Will Moore, Commission member.
Darlene Tarian, Commission member.
Suzanne Weckend, Commission member.
Ray Herman, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture.
My name is Linda Duff, and I'm your new manager of Administrative Services with Parks, Recreation, and Culture. So I'm just coming to, I don't start till Monday, but I'm just coming to join your meeting, and Ray did all the heavy lifting with the budget work, so I just get to come and watch.
It's okay here. Is yours working too? Is that one working? No.
It's okay. Hold on.
So we'll get it.
Oh, here comes Q. Is he coming? He's coming.
Mine works.
That works. There we are. Can you try yours over there? Okay.
Oh, Donna.
It was Donna.
Okay, so just for those who didn't hear, that was Linda in the corner. Welcome, yes, Linda, and yeah, excited to have you on board.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Excellent.
Steve Meikle, Manager of Recreation and Culture.
Chris Idley, Manager of Park Services.
Donna Costin, Deputy Director of Finance.
I'm Warren Jones. I'm the Director of Corporate Services and just happen to be acting CAO right now for Lou Varela, who is back with us full-time starting on Monday.
I'm Deb Hopkins, and I'm the Deputy Director of Corporate Services.
Stuart Culbertson, Vice Chair of the Commission.
Matt Fairbarns, Commission.
Monty Holding, Chair of the Commission.
I'm Andrew Appleton, Councillor.
Hazel Braithwaite, Councillor.
I'm Corinne Green, Councillor.
And I'm Kevin Murdoch, Mayor. And now we'll hand it over to you, Ray. And this will be a less formal meeting than some of us are used to, but we'll still keep some decorum here in terms of directing questions and so forth. So go ahead, Ray.
Thank you, Your Worship. For those who have been here longer, you'll I'm sure have noted that the budget binder includes less detail than in past years. That's in keeping with a new approach that is being done municipality-wide in the budget process. So I think ours is maybe a hybrid. We're not all the way there, but we're further along than past budgets would have represented. So we won't be going through line by line as was sort of done in the past. Be generally going over some of the areas and certainly able to ask any questions. Given that the package is smaller than in the past, hopefully it's been easier to get through and absorb for folks, and then we'll be ready for any questions. Also, will note, if you haven't already, that the page numbers are found on different parts of the page. We have page numbers this year, which is good, but depending on whether it's portrait or landscape, it will alter which corner of the page you find it. So my apologies for anybody who will have to kind of look for a page number. But with those sort of introductory comments, I'll just excuse me, start with respect to the memo at the beginning. As far as 2018's performance goes, the net operating expenditure for the department was 5.49%, or $22,000 less than the approved net budget of $4,034,487. There's a number of reasons for that, but primarily, increased admissions on the revenue side. Increased admissions, a lot of lessons. We'll see this when we look at the variance pages. Camp registrations, childcare registrations, and then, of course, with a lot of those program-related increases in revenue, there are corresponding increases on the expenditure side. If you're putting on more lessons, it stands to reason that you have more staff providing those lessons, things like that. Otherwise, there was, I won't spend much time here. We'll look at the variances when we get to them. Because I'd like to spend a little bit more time on the 2019 budget request and explaining some of the numbers that are in this binder. The net operating budget request for 2019 is an increase of $700,000 or 17.36% over 2018. Obviously, that's a big number. There's a reason for that. The 2018 budget, as represented in this binder, was put together essentially in 2016 dollars with respect to labor. And that's because the collective agreement expired at the end of 2016. The increases that were expected when a new collective agreement was ratified were budgeted for corporately in the finance department, not departmentally. So the bottom line, and when you'll see the big picture at the end of the next 3 weeks, those increases are covered essentially, but for our departmental budget, it looks rather ugly. But there are 3 years worth of budget increases in that number, and also the impact of the employer's health tax, so wages and benefits. Now, for some of you who've been reading enough and looking at the draft financial plan that I think will come out next week's meeting, officially, there was a restated budget number that includes, for the 2018 budget, that includes 2017 and 2018 wage increases. So you will see that demonstrated or put down in a little different way. If you factor that all in, on our net increase is actually a 5.34% increase. And that 5.34 would include the impact of the employer's health tax and then the 2019 2% increase on wages. So, but what I've written in the budget here, unfortunately I wrote this memo prior to us having that restated budget information. Otherwise I wouldn't have tried to confuse you so much. But what I did take out was all 3 years of the wage increases and the benefit impact, which would then, if you take that all out, the it's actually a decrease from 2018 to 2019 of minus 1.84% or $74,000. That's really not fair. I mean, there should be a 2% bump in there because of 2018 to 2019 impact. So the restated budget, when you see that, is a better number to go by. But I just wanted to try and explain, number one, that big 17% number, and also why there's some different numbers here. So hopefully I haven't confused the issue even worse.
You probably have, but just for clarity, does that number include all operation and capital, or is that purely your operational changes?
That's operating. Yeah, it doesn't include capital. So the 2019 budget includes the following items: a scheduled 3-week shutdown in the pool. For those who are new at the table, we shut down the pool and the arena for regular maintenance on opposite years. So 2018 was an arena shutdown year. 2019 is a pool shutdown year. What has now become a regular 3-month closure of the Sportsview Lounge from June to September. It says 10th, but I think 8th is the correct date. I think we'll be open for the Monday. That is, in past years, the lounge was not performing as well financially, and the summer months were the worst performing months. So it was closed during those months, and then we took advantage of those closures to add additional summer camps. So it's been a sort of a 2-pronged excellent turnaround from a financial perspective. The lounge is doing much better, and the summer camps have certainly been performing very well in the years since. No fee increase on admissions or for licensed care programs. I'll speak more to that when we get to the fees and charges section. No contribution to the Parks and Recreation Reserve Fund. This is a smaller reserve fund that, as I mentioned, on offsetting years, we either close the pool or the arena. And in the years that we close the pool, it's a more expensive year than the years that we close the arena. So by $20,000. So what we did a number of years ago, because it would impact our request, every second year would be good, and the opposite years would not be as good. So to level it out, we just requested for a $20,000 contribution on the arena shutdown years to go to a reserve that at the time we were going through quite a number of pumps and motors and just a lot of items in the $5,000 to $10,000 range that if you absorb them into operating were a little tough. So that was done. So there is no contribution to that reserve in 2019, given that it's a pool shutdown year. Next year, you'll see that there is that contribution. And also the preschool playhouse is a program that runs out of the Windsor Pavilion, and we've made a change, or there will be a change there come September. That will change from operating Monday, Wednesday, and Friday full days to Monday through Friday mornings only. That's as was expressed, some demand expressed in the community. I think since the word has got out, my understanding is that's been popular news, and it also will be more efficient. As you see, there's a net saving there just for the last 4 months of the year. Non-discretionary expenditures include the wages and benefits, as previously noted. Step increases, so staff, as they're here with us for once they start at step 1, then they move to step 2 and 3 after they've been with us a while. And some utility costs increases. I'll note the expectation for the energy loop that is getting very close to completion should have a fairly substantial impact on our gas usage, that it should be reduced significantly, but there will be some additional hydro increase there because there's a lot of pumps and motors that are running to operate all the equipment that's there. But certainly from a carbon perspective, our improvements will more than offset the increases here. And there are little ups and downs all the way through the budget, but that's just a general sense. Discretionary expenditure increases include $43,000 for urban forest strategy implementation. Council may recall last year approving the first 5-year implementation plan, and this is year 2 of that 5-year plan. So as laid out in the plan, there's $43,000 that we're requesting. Cost for water bags also related to trees, to tree watering. Sprinkler head replacements. This has been an ongoing program to replace the heads. So this additional money would allow for an acceleration of that program that not only provides irrigation in a more efficiently in terms of how the grass and gardens are irrigated, but also substantial water consumption savings. So we'd like to accelerate that program to realize those benefits sooner. And increased costs of custodial supplies are embedded in a couple of different areas that's with increased usage. Certainly some of the parks, Willows Park is significantly busier than it has been in past years, and we're just seeing a greater need for custodial supplies. And then the aquatic wages, this has been I want to say maybe a 4 to 5 year ongoing issue that we've tried to address. Currently we have some times in the pool where we only have one lifeguard on. And when those times happen, the receptionist on staff is the backup in case of emergency. That can work. It's not ideal. We have in the past, those receptionists have to be trained a couple of times a year. It's fairly physical training that some of them are not used to. And in the past, we've had a couple of injuries related to that training. Also, at that time, we called around and soon found out that there's not very many pools left that are still running that way with one guard on at a time. So this is an ongoing effort. We've been just sort of picking away little bits each year to reduce the number of shifts that where there's only one lifeguard on. So if this money is approved, I think we're down to under $20,000. So another 2 to 3 years, and we'll be where we would like to be. So essentially, this request as represented here tonight is a status quo budget related to service levels, save for the additional money for the urban forest strategy implementation. And then fees and charges and capital I'll speak to when we get to those sections of the binder. So
Right.
just
a quick, the discretionary expenditures there, some of them are, as you see, were started in previous years, like the tree planting and watering. So are these net increases in this year, or is that total amount? Some of these
no,
numbers
net for this year. That's
These are net. In
yes.
this year. Okay, thanks.
So if we go to the overview section, the first page, page 1, and depending which way you're looking, is either the lower right or the upper right corner, but is just a summary that shows last year's budget actuals, how we did, and then this year's, the variances, and this year's budget. I will note that the department still for 2019, this budget would represent a 65% recovery rate, which in the grand scheme of things, certainly province-wide, would be considered quite outstanding. I mention that because later on in this overview section, there are recovery rate or user pay ratios, as they're titled, I believe, for a number of different departments, but really the overall recovery rate is the one that means the most. Some of those other building ones don't include some of the overhead. They don't include my time or management time. They don't include necessarily reception staff time at the NLC and things like that. So I just wanted to point out that 65% recovery rate. The next 2 pages, there's program revenue and expenditures. These are summarized. That's what I was referring to earlier on tonight. There's not detail on all these areas. I'm not going to go through this line by line. The major differences are coming up in the variance sheets. So unless there are questions, I'll just move to the variance sheets.
Let's talk through the variance sheets.
Okay. So the variances, there are two sets of variances here. Page 4. The first are related to 2018 performance. So it's 2018 budget compared to 2018 final or actual results. And the first page is revenue, the second page are expenditures, and then the second set of variances are related to 2019. Those are the variances that you'd be looking at with respect to any change in potential taxation, 2018 budget to 2019 budget, and again, revenue and expenditures. These variances are just the major variances. Over $10,000 is the threshold that we used. And you'll note that in our department, revenues and expenditures are often tied very closely together. So where you'll see something like aquatic instruction up $71,000, and you might think, oh, we're up $71,000, but we talk about the net a lot because that's the number that impacts taxes. You go to the expenditure side and wages are up as well. So a lot of times those expenses and revenues go up and down together. Some of the significant ones here, actually, I should speak to the fact that the question that's come up the last couple of years is we've been performing well. I know I'm not supposed to use the word surplus, but our net expenditure has been less than budgeted for in the last several years. That's why I say surplus, so I don't have to spit out that whole sentence every time. But so there's a number of reasons for that. One of the big reasons is how we budget for our programs. And so you'll see here in these variances where we, so for summer camps, we budget to be 75% full. And you know, arena 75% full. You get down to daycare, budget to be 90% full. And then we exceed those registration expectations. But on a program by program basis, staff are expected to put their program together, and then they identify how many people they can accommodate in a program. So let's hypothetically say 12 people you can accommodate in a program. And if 6 is your break even, like 6 is your minimum to run, a lot of places will budget to be running at 6 people. Just to be conservative, and who knows. So of course we're budgeting to be 9, 10 people, but the program could still potentially run at 7. As it turns out, our programs have been popular, our staff have done a good job, and a lot of our programs are running full or very near full, and that's great. Where staff get nervous as we push that 75 up towards 90 is because I still remember 2011 and 2012. And in 2010, a lot of departments had a spectacular year. It was the year of the Olympics, and people were out being more active and using programs, and Oak Bay was no different than Mission, where it was before. We did extremely well. The 2011 budget was developed with expectations that that would continue, and it didn't. So 2011 and 2012 were not very good years. We did not make budget, and so the concern from staff is if we continue to push, if we budget to be 100% full, and in general terms we're 90% full, those programs are still doing extremely well and strong, but the question would be what's going on? Why are your programs underperforming related to budget when in fact they're still doing well? So that's where some of the resistance has been to just go whole hog to raise those revenues up to those higher levels. But we do, as we meet with our staff, look at the last 3 years of every budget line, revenues and expenses, to look and see whether there's a trend or whether this is a one-off or whether this is the first year of what might be a trend. When there's 3 years worth of good data to show, yeah, all right, we should bump this up, then we've attempted to do that. When it's maybe the first year of a particular area doing really well, we've tried to resist going too far down that road. So I hope that makes some sense. If this is anything like my day-to-day at work, when I talk, I see people look at me and sometimes there's a tear coming down their eye. So you can just kick me on if you start to tear up. Okay. So yeah, there's nothing extraordinary here that I haven't really covered in a general sense on the revenues for 2018. It's a lot of camps and instruction in different areas, and admissions doing quite well. The next page are the expenditures related to last year. You'll see where there's retroactive pay for 2017 that's noted in a number of places. There's a few places where it says revenue is up, which is an indication that the revenue and expenditures are linked. So that, for instance, community recreation, the second area, contract services, revenue is up $35,000, but the expenditure side of that to support that increased activity was up $20,000. Aquatics up $96,000 in wages and benefits, but the admissions and lessons were up substantially. Some of the things I would point out in the culture section, about just over halfway down the page, up $45,000. That's due to primarily the two pieces of public art that were purchased last year. They were funded from the Public Art Fund. So really, in the grand scheme of things, that's an in and an out. But for this binder, it shows as an expense here. The other things I'd like to point out, there's a lot of increased expenditures here supporting the additional revenue, but the last two sections, maintenance and parks, you'll see where it says open positions. We've continued an unfortunate sort of 3-year odyssey of having a lot of vacancies, absences, illnesses, and this year maintenance and parks certainly had their fair share. More so on the maintenance side, you'll see that the full-time salaries and benefits was down $80,000 because of those positions, but the part-time wages and benefits right underneath was up $65,000. That's pulling in auxiliary folks to backfill for those areas. Parks, not as much backfilling happens there. They tend to run short, cross their fingers for the summer months when we get to hire some auxiliary staff and seasonal staff, and then try to catch up. So,
Ray,
yes.
sorry, as you're going through this, the culture piece with the expenditures on the art, the money would be transferred out of the Public Art Fund, but it's not reflected here in revenues.
Correct.
So why is it not? I mean, to balance the sheets out, normally you would reflect that in the. Is that Ms. Costin? Should I turn that question over to you?
Through you, Chair. So because public art can't be amortized, it needs to be expensed, even though we budget through it through capital. And so we need to move it out. We need to move it out to an expenditure account, and because it comes from Parks, Rec, and Culture, but it is a flow through. So
it doesn't have to show on our revenue side, on the other side, that the money transferred out of reserves into Parks, Rec, and Culture to cover those costs?
It's offset, yes.
It just doesn't seem to be showing on the program revenue side under Culture.
Well, it's funded by capital, so it's
oh, so
that
it's not
fine.
Operating. It's not an operating
Yes,
revenue.
yes.
It's a capital.
Yes.
And the joys. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That would have been an odyssey for me to explain that. So if we're good with 2018, I'll move to the budget to budget variances on page 6. So this is 2018 budget to 2019 budget. Revenue, you'll see there's a number of areas where we have tried to increase the revenue given performance in 2018 where we think that it's safe to do so. So you can see right away in the camps, they're up $56,000. We've said that 2018 was up. We're offering some additional camps. Aquatics is up because of 2018 being a good year, and there's fee increases that factor into that as well. One area I would like to highlight and just throw some kudos to staff is just the performance in the Sports View Lounge. As I referenced earlier, that it wasn't all that long ago that it was struggling mightily, and Linda Regan is the supervisor there now, who is now full time. Last year at this time she wasn't, but she is now, and she's just done tremendous work and has come with a background in the city in food and beverage, and is very well connected and has really done some tremendous things. But I should also note that it's been a struggle for her, and I'm told, and she's told, citywide is really a struggle to get staff and keep staff. So there is, it's not enough money to show really in the, well, it's embedded in this number, but we've put some additional money in there. We're going to try and establish some team leader positions, a team leader cook and a team leader front end, to try and have a little bit higher wage that will attract and retain some staff, because honestly, Linda has been cooking every day from 10 till 2 because she has no cook. So, and we've tried, I know Suzanne gave us a contact at Camosun with the culinary program, but the scheduling just didn't work out for the students. So that didn't work out. We've been trying anything that we can to get some staff in there. It's been a struggle. So hopefully that little bit extra money will enable us to put a wage out there that will attract some folks and keep them. So I should also note there has been questions in the past as to whether or not the better performance in the lounge should result in going back to being open 12 months of the year. I did talk to Linda about that, and her feeling was still that we would underperform in those summer months. And I asked her, do you think the fact that staff get laid off for those 3 months in the summer is an issue in terms of attracting and retaining some staff? And she said, not at all. The staff that she's talked to are like to be able to go downtown in the summer, where they can work in places where they probably get better tips and things like that. So she didn't think that was an impediment, but so I just wanted to throw that out as well. Yeah, so that's the revenue side, budget to budget. On the expenditure side, you'll see it's this is almost all related to wage and benefit increases in the employer health tax. Some of these numbers would obviously go down if we were using the restated budget numbers from 2018. But the one service level difference here is right at the very bottom. Parks, the urban forest strategy implementation is noted there. So other than that, those are the variances. Those are the major variances for budget to budget.
Okay, thank you. And I should know this, but I don't. Did the Parks Rec and Culture Board go through this budget already once? And so you're very familiar with this. So I'll go to council first, and if there's any questions that come out of that to the Parks Rec and Culture, then I'll open it up to everybody to ask questions. But just at this point, it seems like a good chance to kind of take a breath and let people ask any questions they might have on the summary. Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Just a couple of more broad questions, and thank you for getting the information that I had asked for. I do really appreciate it. Comment on the art asset. I had made this comment before in financial presentations, but it might be helpful because it's not in our assets that we value as we do other assets in the district. It might be helpful to add an addendum that keeps a total valuation list of the artwork that we have. I also suggested to our arts laureate that she may want to revalue that over time because it can move up, and so then it just identifies as in a way, because the art being included with all the other recreation and in the parks does get confusing. But it'd be nice to track it and just see so that we know how much of the art we have as an asset, and if it's improving in value, that could be good too. And just going back to the savings for some of the installations you're doing, I'm wondering if we have any return on investment policy. And I mean by that, do we have, if there's a payback in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, you really move the project up because then you're going to affect the cost savings? Just wondering if there is any policy for that.
Mr. Herman?
Yeah, through your worship, I'm not aware of an actual policy, but that was certainly something. The payback period was a major factor in a lot of the energy savings projects that have been done over the last number of years. Excuse me. Certainly when we were partnered with BC Hydro on the Power Smart program, which we now haven't been for the last 2 or 3 years, but when we were, all of that analysis was done up front before we ever moved forward with any of those projects. And then there was follow-up reporting to ensure that we had hopefully met the expected targets. So certainly on the energy related things, Ken Olson is our contracted energy coordinator, used to be a staff member and then was seconded to that position and has stayed there since retirement. He's continuing, even though we don't have a formal arrangement with BC Hydro, continuing to be involved with them and attending meetings and webinars and things like that. So he's our go-to person to ensure that those types of things are factored in. That being said, the low-hanging fruit has been dealt with. So the projects that are coming forward now have the longer payback period, but they're still worth doing. And lucky enough, the energy loop was a big one. We got a substantial grant. There's $6,000 for lighting retrofit in the gymnasium at Henderson. The payback period for that would be a little bit longer than what we would have experienced in the past, but it's $6,000, and it also saves maintenance costs and having LED lights and not having to go up there every couple of years to replace them. So that's a long-winded way of saying what I said. I don't want to repeat it.
Councillor Patterson?
No policy, but good practices.
Yeah, there we go. Are there any other questions on this portion? Does anybody from the Park, Rec and Culture Commission want to have any other additional questions or want to raise any particular points? Typically we're letting you off a little too early, a little too easy here. Yes, Councillor Zelka spoke too early. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just want to confirm that we will be going through in detail the urban forest strategy and all the work that's been done to date and the work that's planned for the year coming in the last section. Just wanted to make sure whether we would do it at the end or do we do it as we go along, please.
We can do it
we
either
were
way.
sort of planning to do it at the end, but I think we weren't going to go through it in detail. If there are questions, we certainly are willing to answer those. I think the implementation plan is relatively straightforward, but if council would like a summary of what's been done to date, I'm sure Mr. Hidley would be happy to provide one.
I think we'll do it as we go through each of those individually. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And we'll try and get through the numbers first, and then through the bigger questions of what we're going to add onto this piece. Can I think I know the answer to this question. You touched on it a little bit, Mr. Herman. The issue of how optimistic are you in the budgeting process for that? There has been quite a few surpluses over the years, and by my calculations, even with the two losses since in 2011, 2012, we're up about $2.16 million in total surpluses. Do we have a policy at all in terms of this year about 200,000 of using those funds? I mean, Ms. Costin as well, in terms of where those funds go for capital works projects in future, or are they just essentially all go into general revenue when we deal with them as a whole?
Your Worship, I can speak to our role, and then I'm not sure if my answer would need to be supplemented, but typically we would make a request to the finance department that towards year end, when we know that there's going to be those funds available, most particularly if we think some of our reserve funds are lacking. So for instance, a few years back, one of the bubbles, our two bubbles used to be offset by quite a period of time, so they wouldn't both need to be replaced at the same time. Then there was a fire, and now they're almost lined up at the same time, which meant we need a whole lot more money in that reserve in order to address that issue when they're both going to be replaced. So we requested some additional funds there. So we would, if there was something like that where we felt reserve funds needed a bump, we would ask for that. Otherwise, I would defer to someone else.
Your Worship, we do not have a very formal policy on reserve. So you will remember for surplus, I'll call it. So you will recall last year that we used a significant amount of surplus to do our bike lanes, for example. But that is one of the things that we actually have on our work plan, and we would anticipate that those would be council decisions to at some point we would come to council and say, here is where we're sitting at the end of the year, and ask you where you want us to put those surplus funds. They normally go into reserve accounts, but we would like those decisions to be made by you. So that's a piece of work in progress.
Okay. They didn't need to be on. Okay, thank you. Councillor Green?
Thanks, Ray, for all the information and laying it out this way. It's really helpful. I just wanted to ask if there is a plan to integrate the capital side of the operation into the asset management, the overall asset management plan that the district is going to be developing. And I'm just assuming that would happen. It would be rolled into a broader plan around asset management. Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, I think that's in keeping with the whole movement corporately to tie the strategic plan to the budget. So certainly the asset management plan would be a part of that. So as I mentioned, we certainly haven't taken the full step there, but I would expect by next year we'll be a lot closer.
All right, I don't see any other hands shooting up here, so we'll move on. Mr. Herman, back to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I think we're at page 8, which is the start of some user pay ratio pages for a few different facilities. You'll note as we go through these, all the recovery rates are down. Given, the budget to budget issue and the substantial increase that's reflected the way this budget is presented. And if we use the restated numbers, it would be impacted again as well. But you'll see the first one is the Henderson Center. That recovery rate is down a couple of percent. almost 3. Then the next page is Monterey.
Sorry, Mr. Herman, just these numbers that you're showing here, because it gets very confusing. Does this include does the 2018 number reflect the actual labor load costs, or is it
That should be actual.
so including the retroactive amounts to those
Yes.
pieces?
Should be. I'd have to go and make 100% sure before I say 100% that it is, but it should be yes.
Okay.
All those previous columns are all actual columns, and the last one is budget. So if 2018 wasn't actual, it should note that, or wasn't budget. Pardon me. It would say budget if it was budget. The fact that it doesn't would suggest that it's actual numbers. And they're pulled, the links are right from our detailed sheet, so it should be final.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't really go through these that much, but hopefully they make sense. There's the revenues, the expenditures, those are the actual years from 2012 on. There's a net expenditure, and then the user pay ratio or recovery rate.
You said this already, but it does not include like shared costs of administration and things of that nature.
No.
Okay.
No. So these are pretty focused on what happens in those facilities without a lot of overhead or things like that. So that's why really these recovery rate sheets are decent analysis for that facility year to year. I'm not so sure that it's great analysis in terms of comparing one facility to another facility. Really, then it gets down to the overall recovery rate because that includes everything. But certainly from a year-to-year perspective, it's handy information. So the next one is Monterey. Again, as I mentioned, these will all be down a little bit, and this one is down a couple of percent. But the ups and downs have kind of been talked about.
Darian, go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair to Ray. I'm just wondering, just trying to get this 17%. Oh, sorry, to get this 17% in my head better. You mentioned briefly that the 2019 budget here hasn't been restated, so this actually has all 3 years of wage increased load on it, plus the EHT, and because it's not the restated number. Is that why it's down the few percent?
Yeah, through the chair, it's the 2018 budget numbers that were restated.
Okay.
2019 includes everything. So 2019 has got, and the way this binder is laid out, the difference between 2018 and 2019 represents the full 3 years of collective agreement increases, retroactive to 2017, plus the employer's health tax. So that's why the number is so ugly. But that restated number refers to the 2018 budget, and that's not in here. So I hope I'm not confusing the issue by bringing that up. But the financial plan that is going to be presented next week at the budget meeting next week shows that restated number, and it has 2017 and 2018 increases in it. This binder doesn't.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Monterey is there. The Oak Bay Rec Center, obviously a bigger center, so a few more areas included. But the user pay ratio again is at the very bottom, and it again is down given those impacts that we've talked about. The Neighborhood Learning Center is on the next page, and that's down. This is a real good example of one that doesn't include overhead, and it doesn't include, for instance, reception staff time but there's obviously reception support that goes into registering people for activities that take place there and such. So good for a year-to-year comparison, but not a true reflection of the financial performance of that area.
Thank you, Chair. Ray, you had mentioned earlier you were going to discuss something related to childcare or the preschool, or maybe not.
Maybe the fees?
Yes.
At fees and charges, just the fact, yeah, we'll probably talk then about why we've not increased the fees, and Steve has some good information on that.
Thank you.
I'll keep my head up here and stop looking at the numbers. Can't resist. Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, the NLC is there. So then we turn to Parks, Rec, and Culture New Initiatives. So there's 3 pages here that were taken.
Oh, yeah. Mr. Culbertson.
Thank you. To the Chair. Just before we leave the user pay analysis here, I think we should be pretty proud of the amount of user pay or cost recovery we get out of the facilities in Oak Bay. When you average them, just the numbers that are here together, it's about 85% a year, which is pretty good. The one that sticks out, and it's, I think, been a concern at the Commission for a couple of years, at least since I've been on it, is Monterey. And I appreciate that Monterey is a bit of a different model because we have a partnership with the Activities Association to deliver programs, etc. But we are looking at a budget here which continues to show that Monterey's expenses are going up and the user pay ratios going down. So when we discussed this at the Commission, I proposed that, and I should say we had a good presentation from staff that sort of compared Monterey to other like facilities in the region or the province about, you know, funding and cost recovery. But I suggested what I'd like to see, certainly for by next year's budget, is staff's analysis of how this situation could be improved. What could be done? What are the options that might be in front of us to see a ramping up of the user pay ratio at Monterey? I mean, I don't know what they are, but I think staff would have some pretty innovative ideas that we could review and evaluate to see if that line could be turned up. That you'll see, tag into one of the strategic priorities that we put in the Commission's strategic plan, which is how do we maximize the cost recovery in all of our facilities. So I just wanted to bring that up as something we talked about at the Commission that for your consideration for the budget.
Thank you. And I think revenue generation is sort of one of those sort of things at the top of mind all the time, and I think it's a question we're going to have to, as a council, look at. How do we find new ways of new sources of revenue? Some of these costs are fixed, and some of them are related to revenue. But I think that is a very real question that we're facing at all across the board. Andrew, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, just following up on something that Mr. Culbertson said, because I had made a similar note for myself. For my purposes, for the Monterey Centre budget, it would be interesting to see a breakdown on revenue. I'm assuming that revenue includes both the memberships, the programming revenue, those kinds of things, parking potentially as well, and room rentals, all associated with that. It would be useful to maybe see that. And I appreciate all the work that's gone into summarizing this content so that it isn't in the fine detail. For this particular one, it might just be useful to see that when, as Mr. Culbertson mentioned, maximizing revenue, if there's a trend over time in terms of programming revenue, room rentals, those kinds of things, then it would be a little easier to spot.
Thank you. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you so much, Chair. And thank you for the presentations so far. My absolute compliments to the fabulous program. My kids, thank you as well. They absolutely love all the stuff going on there. One of the questions I asked last year on these pages relating to the user pay ratio, in particular around the Monterey Centre, was something I referred to as the burn rate, or the user pay ratio on a per person sort of basis. In other words, how much does it cost? I mean, overall, 85% on average is a fantastic, user pay ratio. In fact, not just fantastic, outstanding. But I had similar concerns that I have in terms of the Henderson Centre. Obviously, it has a different model. And obviously, I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. But it would be useful to know not only the user pay ratio, but also how much does it cost on a per patron basis, maybe on a per visit basis, to, shall we say, service the patron, as a way of maybe finding out a different way of comparing costs. And finding a way to value the experience and whether and how that may possibly compare with other rec centers throughout the area. So if it's possible to find out the burn rate or the cost per patron for Monterey at some point, if not this year, then certainly next year, I would very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Councillor Green and then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Thank you. Ray, I should probably know this. I don't think I do. I hope it's not too obvious in a question, and I hope you don't burst into tears. But is there a revenue sharing process between and among facilities? So, in the case of Monterey, if their revenue is down, can you take revenue from a high performing, say, Henderson? I'm just wondering if there's a shared system across facilities. Thank you.
Through the chair, the short answer is no. We track financial performance of each area so that we know how it's doing. Obviously, we want all areas to do well, but just by the certain nature of certain facilities, they're going to be more costly to operate. Arenas and pools cost a lot of money to run. The NLC doesn't have those kind of expenditures, for instance, but we still try to have as accurate a picture of the costs as we can. With respect to per visit costs, we can make an effort there. It's not going to be perfect because, we don't stand at the doors with a counter. So a lot of people, for instance, will come in for lunch to the lounge or the Fern Cafe, and they're not counted. So on a per visit basis, there'd have to be some guesswork applied to that. Sorry, I'm answering two questions in one there.
Wait, go ahead.
Did I answer your question?
You did. I just wondered, is there any potential for a shared revenue model or not? Across facilities, keeping in mind that they are very different. I agree with you. I just wondered if that had ever been looked at to augment one facility by one that's doing really well. And it may not be possible, and it's just and you don't have to answer tonight, but.
Well, it's okay. Through the chair, it's just I've never had that question before. Typically, councils and commissions like to know how an area is doing. In the end, it's all one budget. It's one net expenditure. So that's kind of the way we view it. I think it's up to council usually to determine the value of the service that's provided and whether council is comfortable with the cost of that particular service being provided. If we were to blend those numbers at all, it'd be more difficult to do that analysis, I think.
Thank you. And I was just going to point out, page 1 is that sort of rolled up piece of that in that sense, but it's a... Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and through you to Mr. Herman. Another thing I think that is very difficult to determine, just as you said, it's hard to know exactly all of the users and what they're using the facilities for to get that value. But we also, another thing that is not really represented in here, I know at Monterey Center has a very high turnout of volunteers for all their events. They have volunteers that do everything. And so it's no different really in a way from parks and in some of the work that Margaret Litke and her people do. We are getting an extensive amount of, I don't like to use the word free labor, but it is free labor. It's a labor of love, I guess. And we're very fortunate in Oak Bay, and it would be nice to be able to somehow capture that value that doesn't appear in the financial statements. It's real, it's tangible, and yet we don't value it. And so that would also be a really interesting exercise and useful, I think, for us to really appreciate the full value of these facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? I don't see any. I might just make one comment here in terms of not for this budget, but as a broader conversation. One of the problems that in these sort of roll-ups of user pay ratios that I see is there is a significant lack of information in terms of what some of those ancillary costs are, in particular the capital costs. And you touched on it briefly. I mean, our recovery rates of Oak Bay Rec Center are extraordinarily high. However, the maintenance cost of those buildings, to maintain that and make it attractive to have people coming in, we have to invest in that. And when we don't recognize that in here, we sometimes might think, oh, we'll just do more of that, and it's a money source. And so how we, and this is not just to Parks, Rec, and Culture, frankly, as an organization, for us to be able to get a real sense of where our real costs are, that sort of weighted, and we're going to get there over time. But I think that might be one way of recognizing this breakdown a little bit is those capital costs, maybe some of the volunteer value costs, some other aspect of that you can kind of roll up and say, yes, it costs this many dollars, but here's the actual weighted cost with everything in it. Because I think it's hard to see that in here. It is hard. And I don't like make work projects, but if there's any way of attributing, even using a formula that's very generic that says, on a the total administrative cost is $100, and and there's $100 in revenues or $10 in revenues, so you just allocate $10 per dollar or whatever that is, whatever that ratio is, just so you can kind of have some sense of where those shared costs are, so that we can look at that. Because one of the things is that the numbers are quite small on the Monterey Center, for example, right? They're $400,000 versus the $4 million overall, and so those kind of things also break down a little bit by those numbers. Yeah. Darlene?
Thank you. I was just noting, being a bit of a number wonk myself, that in reality, the net expenditure there, as you were saying, Your Worship, is actually in 2018 10.9% of our total net expenditure on Parks, Rec, and Culture. So, when you consider the value of the Monterey Center, it's probably greater to the community than the 11% that they actually spend on it, per se, when you think about that user group. So just another way of looking at a number.
And we're letting Mr. Hidley completely off the hook because, of course, there's not a lot of revenue return on the parks themselves. So
Don't forget about Windsor Pavilion.
Yes, it's not really a park. It's okay.
It's going to die.
All right. On that, we'll go back to you, Mr. Herman. No, I think we're at new initiatives now. Is that correct?
Correct. Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, page 12. There's two pieces of information here. The first is the first 3 pages are directly taken from the document that was presented to Council in strategic priority discussions, the Parks, Recreation, and Culture section of those. So the first page is really, you'll see a note that it's primarily 2019 capital items, and you'll see these when we get to the capital section. Other than the last item is that pool guard, elimination of 1 guard pool shifts. Ms. Varela had requested that I include that, so it's in there. So if we turn to the second page, this is more of the 5-year plan, larger items. It's certainly not an exhaustive list. There are smaller items that are in staff's working document of 10-year capital plan, but the larger ones are noted here. For 2019, the urban forest implementation is noted. There's the review of the tree protection bylaw. You'll see in the right-hand column those that are recommendations of the OCP are highlighted in yellow. And the review of the tree protection bylaw has no dollar value associated with it, given that that'll be done in-house. And Mr. Hidley has already done a significant amount of work in that regard. And then we get to the bottom two lines and really the next page, and then following that are all pieces that relate to the Commission's strategic plan that was developed over the last year. So the entire plan is included at the back. And then my understanding, I wasn't party to the discussion, but my understanding was the Commission was asked to come up with their top 3 priorities for 2019, which they did at one of our recent meetings, and that was forwarded for inclusion in this document. But I have had some questions as to how that information is represented in what we put forward as staff, and it's probably my time now to speak to that. I think from staff's perspective, we're proud to say that I think the number of the priorities that are listed in the full document are underway. Certainly the Carnarvon Park plan is very near completion, sometime in the next month or two. The urban forest implementation is ongoing, and we're into year 2 of that effort. And there are some others, the addressing the environmental impacts. I'm not wording it correctly, but certainly there's been a lot of good work done through the HSP grants that we received, and Wiley Thomas's excellent work, and the work of so many volunteer groups in doing invasive species removal and things like that. So from a staff perspective, I think we are making progress on some of the initiatives. Might not be to the level that some folks would like to see, but wanted to note that. The other thing I need to say is, from a staff perspective, we really believe in the value of the full-blown departmental master plan as noted as a recommendation in the OCP. And there's a reason, I guess, for that. And quite honestly, from a staff perspective, if we could have, I would have even included the Carnarvon Park piece in that. And the reason for that is, if we pull out certain topics and do a mini master plan on this item and that item, in 5, 6, 7 years, I'm going to be tasked with putting forward a request for capital items. And I'm going to have 6 different plans, all with their own list of recommendations that don't look at the other 5 or 6 plans. And all of them are going to say, in 2023, you should do this and this and this. So I'm going to have a list that is too cumbersome to bring forward to council. And so then I'm going to be tasked, and staff are going to have discussions about how we prioritize what's there. If you do one master plan, there's cohesiveness, there's all of that is taken into account. And then when the recommendations come forward, that's part of the deliverables that you would expect in such a plan. Give us a phased approach to how to get this, large list of things that need to be done. Give us a game plan to try and do that. So I think for those reasons, staff feel that the big master plan from a staff perspective would be a higher priority than doing a playground master plan on its own, or doing opening up the dog issue, off-leash issue on its own. And that's why it's presented the way it is. I'm quite certain that there'll be some folks who don't agree with me here tonight, and that's fine, but I need to put staff's perspective forward, so that's what I wanted to do.
Thank you. And can I ask, before we get to other questions, there's a list here of costs, and there isn't any, and I think we've struggled with this every budget, but some of these may make a lot of sense if there's additional revenues that we could find to cover them, or grants to cover some of those costs, or they may have an impact on, I'll give an example maybe of the picnic shelter, maybe have a grant available for it, or the some of the other pieces may have grants, and we've used that quite effectively for some of the invasive species removals. But when we're doing budgeting, it's hard to say, well, we'll approve this subject to us being able to get some other source of funding or for finding some revenue. The urban forest, good example. Can we look at ways of getting fee structures and things to help fund some of those pieces? So at what point here do we look at this from more than just the cost, but how do we, the means of offsetting, again, some of these costs?
Some of that's timeliness. So as an example, the Energy Loop grant that we just got, included in that huge project, that almost $700,000 project, we had in our capital plan the replacement of a dehumidifier in the arena at close to $100,000. I think it was about a $90,000 item that we were able to pull off of this list because it was incorporated within the bigger project. So we're always looking for those opportunities, but sometimes, you know, if a chiller needs to be replaced and there's no grant program right now that we can throw in, then we're not going to do it. And it also depends on how critical that piece is, or how much of a safety issue it might be. You know, often putting together a grant application on a large ticket item takes a while, and then takes a while to hear back, and then if you don't get it, so I think we would kind of weigh all those factors, but we're always looking for any grant monies that might be available. We're also, as we talked about earlier, trying to ensure that reserve funds are augmented, so that, you know, for instance, some of these big roofing projects that are listed can be addressed, and we've known that they're coming for a while. And as you push this 5-year plan out to 10 years, and I'd like, you know, hopefully we're going to get to a 20-year capital plan, we've got time to prepare. So hopefully, if the reserves are in a position where they can take on some of these larger ticket items, we can start to look for grants for the ones that are not quite so big and things like that.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Zelka?
Thank you so much, Chair. On the same vein with respect to finding, I guess, innovative ways of paying for these items, I make reference on page 12 to for example, the Wi-Fi upgrade at multiple centres that has been budgeted for $75,000. One potential innovative way is to look at the free public Wi-Fi that was put in by the City of Vancouver, where they were able to partner with TELUS. And TELUS with a win-win contractual relationship, where the City of Vancouver provided their building roofs for free to put in infrastructure for cell phones that provided the opportunity for free Wi-Fi throughout the City of Vancouver. I use that as a model in my other job at the province to put free Wi-Fi into a number of rest areas throughout British Columbia, using exactly the same model, where again a win-win, where the TELUS in both cases was able to provide these instead of putting up a cell phone tower, they took advantage of a building that's already there. So they were able to save money, and free Wi-Fi was able to be provided. So through the chair, I offer again, if it's appropriate, and I would hope it to be appropriate, that maybe this fee could potentially be eliminated if I could find someone to work with at Parks and Rec on maybe coming up with a contractual way of moving that forward.
And in fairness, we don't have to resolve all those details here tonight, but I think it's good to raise these ideas so that as we're going through the finalizing of the budget piece, we may want to pull that one out as a capital and maybe look at some alternate or not. Councillor Green?
Just a quick comment. Oh, sorry. Just a really quick comment through you, Chair. Ray, I totally agree with you on the master plan concept, on that vision of doing a broad plan that isn't piecemealed. And I actually think that's the way Oak Bay should look at its entire operation, is on that broad planning level, because I think it also enhances communication between and among departments and groups. Because if you do it in a siloed fashion, you're right, you lose the greater vision and the ability to form partnerships. So I agree. I'm one person that agrees with you, at least.
Yes. Go ahead.
Hi, I'd like to address the line item or commission priority, update dog use policies.
Yeah.
You may recall that the commission passed on to mayor and council in, I think, June, a recommendation that we do something about this fairly quickly. And part of the reason why is that in a lot of cases we lack the tools to be able to effectively manage dog use in areas. Now, I'd like to draw specific attention to Cattle Point, but use it as an example because it's a really good example of what can go wrong. We tend to look at costs for repairing areas, natural areas that have been pretty torn up by dogs, at around $50 per square meter. It's pretty expensive to repair areas after they've gone down the gurgler, so to speak. So it's always wise to try and get ahead of the ball and not let things get down that far down the path. You can contrast, I think, did Mayor and Council have a presentation by Wiley Thomas? Not yet, okay. There's a very revealing photograph there where he shows Dallas Bluffs, what the area above Dallas Bluffs looked like, where people run dogs along Dallas Road, what it looked like in the, not that long ago, I don't know what the exact date was, and what it looks like now. Probably you'd be looking at more than $50 per square meter to restore that area. And we're seeing the same sorts of damage, not so far down the path yet, and I want to emphasize the word yet. We're seeing the same sort of damage happening at Cattle Point. We lack any bylaw authority, as I understand it, to restrict dog use on Cattle Point right now. So if we put off until 2020, that gives us 2 more years of degradation on that site. And that's just one example of a situation where we may be digging ourselves, to use a bad metaphor, a much deeper hole than we need to by deferring that. Now I realize it places a burden on staff to take on a project that significant, plus also is going to bring out all the usual conflicts we have around dog use management versus natural environment degradation. However, those issues are going to erupt no matter when we do it. And in the meantime, the costs for repair, should we decide that we want to maintain some of these systems, some of these areas in a natural condition, are going to increase. So I would strongly recommend that we do what we can either to come up with interim measures to protect those areas that are at greatest immediate threat, and put off the more comprehensive review of the bylaws till later, or else just bite the bullet and do the whole thing right now. But I wouldn't just say let's close our eyes and hope nothing happens for the next 2 years, because I think most of us know what's been happening for the last few.
Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. That reminded me of one more thing I wanted to say on the same vein with respect to dogs and rare plants. Making reference, if I may, to page 14, which is the 3 strategic priorities, first, second, and third. Is this the appropriate place to decide on the order of these? Because I noted that protect rare and endangered species is on this page following update dog use bylaws, whereas in the strategic plan, if I go to page, what is it, 19, I believe? Oh, sorry, if I go to page 20 and 21, strategic initiative number 5 is protect rare species, but number 6 is dog use bylaws. I would like to see at the high level, page 14, if at all possible, or if council certainly agrees, that protect rare and endangered species be number 2, and dog use bylaws, as important as they are to a number of people in Oak Bay, that if there's any way of that if they are expedited, it's as a result of a concern for rare and endangered species, not an afterthought. So I seek direction from the chair as to what to do with page 14.
Just procedurally, we're looking at this from a budgeting. So I think at this point we're looking at, are we going to include within this budget any aspects of those specific pieces? Because those 3 are not really listed currently in the budgeting piece, and Ms. Buckin, you wanted to just comment? No, you're okay? And I believe this is accurate. You can, please do correct me if I'm wrong. That page that you referred to, that had numbers 5, 6, 7, those,
Yes.
that was an unordered list. Is that correct? Yeah. So it was not intended to be in order of priorities, and that was a request gone back. I say that's a big list. If we're looking at sort of budget in the short term, what are the priorities? And that is the list that came back here, the 1, 2, 3.
Well, I very much appreciate that. If I may follow up, I do see, at least for next year, something about updating the dog. Where is it? Yes, on page 13, $60,000 ish or $50,000 for dog use, but I don't see anything in the budget for protect rare and endangered species. So that's the only reason why I raised the question for this year. Where is it in the budget? Thank you.
I think it was on the budget because it's not sort of a clear project. It's more of an approach. But Mr. Herman, is that?
Yeah, Your Worship, and that, and also the fact that I guess in staff's view, we are doing some of that work already. Obviously, we could do more work if there's more money, potentially, although staff capacity then becomes an issue, or whether you're adding staff to do some of that extra work is a discussion that would need to be had, but that's why.
Thank you. Councillor Zelka, you still have the floor if you...
If there is no budget to a strategic priority, then why is it a strategic priority? Because then it basically has no effect.
Well, it's really up to us how we want to allocate funds to it. It's just, it was highlighted. I go to Mr. Fairborn and then Ms. Buckin.
Thank you. I'd like to point out in the urban forest strategy for, I think it was 2021, there is a line item there which isn't a perfect overlap, but if we take a look at the urban forest strategy for that year, yeah, you have a contract on this. If you go back to page, then it's not numbered, and it's in the under the tab for urban forest strategy. It's the I don't know, about the 4th page, where it's the recommendations for year 2021. I'm sorry, recommendations for year 2021. There is something that says inventory Gary Oak and associated ecosystems, rare and endangered plant species, building on existing data sets. So that is not a perfect repeat of the strategic priority we put in there, but it certainly takes us part way to that strategic priority. So I think there has to be something, my sense would be if we were going to maintain something as a strategic priority, we should have an explicit deliverable or action item tied to it. I also know, I was also concerned that wasn't provided in the 5-year plan for strategic priorities. I don't think it's a huge task to strengthen things. There may be a small additional budget ask in order to achieve the additional items. There were actually 3 deliverables in that strategic priority. To develop procedures for protection of critical habitat. So that's a deliverable. That's not sort of business as usual. That's something new to be done. To identify and map the location of endangered species. And so that's something that's partially taken care of in ongoing work, but we don't really have in-house capacity to do that. And nor have we, nor is there any sense that it will actually be completed if we just leave it as sort of a we'll do it when we can sort of thing. And then the third thing was to develop procedures for imperiled ecosystems, and those would be ecosystems irrespective of whether or not they have an endangered species in them. There are endangered ecosystems, and so I would like to see more explicit attention paid to those in our 5-year plan at least, so that we make sure that things don't fall off the side of the table because there is nothing explicit about them. And just to go back to, if I can beg your indulgence for another second, just to go back to urban forest strategy achievements for 2018, one of the urban forest strategy achievements has only been, to the best of my knowledge, only been partially completed. If we go back to the urban forest strategy tab and we look at the 2nd page, there's a bullet saying develop natural area management framework to address of native ecosystem conservation, invasive species management, fire loads, and recreation use in parks. So that's more of a broader umbrella thing. We have this year had, and in my professional opinion, and I work in this field, so I have pretty good, 40 years of experience looking at these things. We had what I consider to be one of the finest documents of this sort presented by for Uplands Park, but it only was for Uplands Park. It wasn't for all natural areas in a municipality. So I would like to see that unfinished business carried forward somehow or other in our budget for completion in 2019. Yeah, and I'm sorry to have talked so much.
As it is a budget meeting, do we have a sense of the budget costs for completing that at this table at this time, or is that something that we could come back with, what that would actually look like? Because it's not on our list here in terms of, so you asked the question, which is reasonable. You'd like to see that included in the budget, but we would need to have a budgetary number attached to what that would actually look like.
Well, I can give you an estimate based on the $10,000 that was done for that would cost to do what was done in Uplands Park. I think that we could at least hit a couple of the other high-profile parks, like Trafalgar Park, where there's a large volunteer action going on, and Anderson Hill Park, where there are a lot of volunteers. So these are the parks where the absence of this sort of information will be most evident to people who are putting a lot of time in. And I think probably between the two of them, I would say between $5,000 and $10,000, probably closer to the $5,000 mark.
Thanks. Ms. Buckingham, do you have a?
It's more of a question related to the commission's strategic plan, and we've heard a little bit about the $50,000 in 2020 and $25,000 in 2019 for the parks master plan or playground master plan and the dog use policies. I was just wondering, I was happy to see the commission's strategic plan included in our budget package. The three priorities are in order. Those three were voted on, so those are in order. I was just wondering if council actually has discussed the Parks, Rec and Culture's Commission strategic plan and accepted it, or where that was at in this stage, because I was pleasantly surprised, but to see the commission recommendation noted as the direction on page 13 with the last two items. So I guess I'm just looking
So no, it has not become a formal policy adopted by council at this point. It's been brought for our attention, I believe, and that's about the extent of it at this time.
Correct. When the document came forward, it was referred to estimates.
Right. Yeah. So here we are.
Great. Thanks. Thank you.
Councillor Zelka?
On the other hand, if we approve this money, effectively we're approving the policy behind the money. So we're kind of in the middle from the back door approving the strategic plan for Parks, Rec and Culture.
I would say we're looking at the top three priorities at this point, and possibly some additional bits and pieces attached as well. So yeah, really nothing's real till you give it money. That's the reality of our system. So
if it's possible to see, say, if it's between $5,000 and $10,000 added to this with respect to addressing that third item on the strategic priorities, I would feel much more comfortable. So that priority number 3, identified on page 14, actually has a deliverable with a dollar figure. I don't know whether that we would send that back or how we would handle that, but I would feel much better if there was actually a deliverable associated with it.
okay, I feel like we're getting into. I'm not sure that we actually made decisions on what that number 3 actually means specifically. I think there's been a really good suggestion by Matt in terms of what that could look like in terms of a study to give that direction to the work being done. But there's other aspects of that as well that also identified around protecting areas from dogs and aspects. So I think it would be helpful at this, if we get through this and come back to say where in that big picture do we want to escalate or not. And just, I want to put a caveat on this as well, because nothing's real till you give it money, but also these dollars are all being discussed here in the context of the needs of the Parks, Rec, and Culture, but we also have some other very large numbers coming at us on the budget, and so they will be considered as part of the overall budgetary piece when we come to that section as well, and that may, again, change the nature of those priorities. So, I'd go to Ms. Tarian first.
Thank you so much. Through you, Chair, I'm wondering about the Wi-Fi upgrade and Councillor Zelko's comments about potentially partnering and finding a win-win there, and whether or not for $75,000 we need to do Wi-Fi upgrades in 2019, when in fact, if we could delay that as an actual expenditure while we search for a win-win partner and maybe never make that expenditure, we could then use that money to move forward the commission priority around dog use policies. And there's sort of two reasons for that. One is this is my last year on commission, and that's not the reason. But for 6 years, we've been talking about dog use policies, and I haven't seen anything really change. And to Matt's point, we have only seen our parks being degraded from that use. And also, in conjunction with that, and I'm going to, thank you for bearing with me, throw one more thing into the pot, which is I agree entirely with you around the master plan for the Park Rec Culture Master Plan. And so if it could be brought all the way forward by deferring the Wi-Fi, and then that meant we could roll the dog use work into that master plan as well, maybe we could find a way to be more thoughtful in how we proceed. Also noting that the dog use piece is around the very fundamental mandate of probably both commission and council, but certainly commission's mandate around stewardship of our parks. And so I'm just trying to feel out a bit of flexibility around that. And you might even buy yourself the 25 grand then on the playground master plan as well, that you can throw at the overall master plan and get that thing started right now in 2019. Thank you. It's just some thoughts.
Thank you. And again, we don't have $75,000. That's just in a line on the ask list at this point. So we're not really taking it out of something we've committed to and putting it to something else. We're asking for all of it at this point. Stuart, then Matt.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of comments on this, the timing and the sequencing here in the strat plan. Commission reviewed the provisional budget in November, which most of these items were in, absent the Commission's recommendations. That predated us finishing the strategic plan and getting it to Council. And then, Mayor, when we met in January, that's when the idea of coming up with 3 priorities that maybe could be attacked in the budget for 2019 came up. So we took that back to Commission and as Suzanne said, prioritized that through a voting procedure, and that's what we came up with. I do want to point out that I agree with Darlene entirely, and the Parks, Rec, and Culture Master Plan is a strategic priority of the Commission. So it sits in there on the list of things to do. But when I look at it here, it starts in 2021, which means that it doesn't actually get implemented to guide the budget process until 2022. And I guess I differ with Mr. Herman's approach to the extent that I don't think it's absolutely necessary that we do a big bang full plan and then everything rolls from that. That in fact, when you get into complex areas like we're dealing with here, these plans are always iterative. You're always using building blocks that you've put in place to incorporate into a plan. So I could envisage a scenario where we have a master playground plan, a dog use plan, the things that we've talked about that actually get integrated into the master plan. They don't become sort of separate from and hard to manage. What I was hoping was that when we reviewed this particular section, which actually constitutes about $280,000 of ask, that we consider, the council considers allocating $100,000 of that to the 3 commission priorities, the playground plan, the dog use update and the endangered species work that we've talked about, and that additional 75,000, because only 25,000 is really captured in the budget, would come from either deferring things like the Wi-Fi expenditure, which I think a number of us question. And now we had, I think, a very good suggestion from Councillor Zelka about a way around that. Or deferring some of those expenditures until later in the fiscal year, at which point the department might be in a situation where they can say, we forecast another surplus, using the language, coming forward, and that those expenditures could roll out towards the end of the fiscal year. Some of these expenditures are fairly quickly done because they talk about getting carpets and things like that. It's not a complex thing, but I'm mindful of what you said earlier, Mayor, about the surpluses that seem to be a regular feature here. Maybe we can risk manage a bit and defer some of this to a consideration of the surplus later in the year, and then afford the money to get going with the Commission's 3 top priorities. So that's just a proposal for consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Fairburn?
Okay, just wanted to make a quick clarification. That $5,000 to $10,000 thing I suggested for addressing something like Trafalgar Park and Anderson Hill, that's not really won't take us into the territory covered by the 3rd strategic priority. That's the completion of work that we had scheduled for 2018 within this, for the 2018 deliverables for the urban forest strategy. So it's basically setting the stage for that 3rd strategic priority, but it isn't achieving the bullets, the deliverables we were hoping from the strategy.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Hidley, is that that review, that partial review done for Uplands Park, is that on a schedule currently for doing other natural parks within Oak Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. Not that one, but some of the points that have been brought up in the Uplands Park management plan, the one that Wiley Thomas has done, would be transferable to other parks. Not all of the aspects. It deals with many, many things, but that would certainly look at that being a model and a bit of a building block.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ms. Wilmette.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to address a little bit the playground initiative. When I joined the commission, I didn't bring this up in the initial stages, but my goal and objective was to start modernizing our playgrounds, and also the #1 goal, and it's come out through the commission initiatives, is not just to modernize them, but to make them accessible. We have playgrounds all over Oak Bay that are not accessible for special needs children. You can't wheel a wheelchair across wood chips. You can't put a child into a swing that doesn't have a back support or a front support if you're a special needs child who has mobility issues or balance issues. I started to ask about playground modernization, and even though there seemed to be some surplus money in the budget, and again, I hate to use the term surplus because I know we don't cover all our costs by just the revenues we get, and playgrounds obviously bring in 0 revenue. But they do speak to our community, and they do speak to how we incorporate and welcome and make our outdoor spaces available. So that was my, starting process, and I did develop a set of philosophical statements, and also prioritizing what kinds of things could be done. And I don't want to just, it's hard to talk about just, say, replacing a swing with a swing or a slide with a slide, or you really need to look at the whole playground and how it fits. And always I've been saying you can't obviously do the whole thing at once. You have to do a little bit at a time. But perhaps we could start with one place and focus on, for lack of a better word, just modernizing and making that place more accessible and welcoming. And that includes things like sun and rain shelter. It includes walkways. It includes barriers to not only protect toddlers and young children from wandering away, but also to protect them from incursions from dogs, bicycles, people playing football or rugby, and I'm thinking particularly here Windsor Park, where people play rugby right beside a playground where children are not protected. So that was the reason, for bringing this to the commission and trying to incorporate it with a master plan, and waiting till 2021 is a long way off. If you've got a child now who's 3 years old, in 2021, that child is going to be 6 years old. Children don't wait. We need to start doing things for children now. I don't think we can ask them to wait till they're 15 to make the playground in their neighborhood accessible and more welcoming. And also, playgrounds can be community centers, where people can gather to picnic, to have a local community gathering, a community garage sale, fundraising. And we have looked also in our initiatives into how we can get money for playgrounds. So that was one of the things that some of us have starting to work on now. And that was one of the reasons we wanted some money, so that perhaps we could, if we see an opportunity to get a grant, then we could hire perhaps a grant writer. Or maybe we could provide some money to a staff person to take a course in grant writing, so that person would be available not only for us but for other people in the municipality and across our service area. So that was the reasoning here. And the 25,000 that thankfully was added is just a way to start to develop a master plan for playgrounds specifically. And again, it is hard to segregate everything out into little pieces, but I think in this case you need to. We need to start working on some aspects of our playgrounds. Thanks, I'll stop.
No, that's great. Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Mayor. It's really wonderful to hear from everyone around the table. Very good ideas, good advice. If it all came funded, we would be a very, very wealthy community. But I think, the difficulty we face as a council is that, we have capital funding costs coming up in the neighborhood of $300 million against reserve funds of $30 million. And if I look at the asset management reports on buildings, just in the first 10 years, we've got to fund about $12 million, and a good portion of those come under recreation. In the first 10 years, the portion for Parks and Rec was about $6.1 million. And until we can kind of wrestle some of those costs down and come to terms with a funding model, that's why we hesitate to use the word surplus. In actual fact, there isn't surplus. There's a shortfall, a severe shortfall in the community. And, and we're fortunate that we get so much support with volunteers. We're very fortunate with all of the good work and the good advice and the brilliant ideas that come out of our commissions and committees. And the passion is evident. The desire is evident, and I certainly heard from many people around residents in Oak Bay when I was campaigning about, especially young families, wanting improvements in parks. So yes, we do need a master plan, I think, but I think we also have to be cautious of when we are planning, bringing back the critical missions that we have to do with the other capital that is required. And really looking at it as a council, we have to look at all, not just Parks and Rec, but all departments. They all have requests, they all have brilliant ideas, and everything is valid. So, and I think it would be helpful too if when we start doing this, we look at buildings, the whole sheet of buildings, Parks and Recs and everybody's buildings, so that Parks and Recs understand the whole gamut of it that we have to look at. And so as residents, some of them in the community, they will say, okay, now what will come first? What takes priority? What is the greatest risk? And it's a tough decision, and so it's not trading off money that we were going to unfunded money that we were going to use for one thing and trading off to the next. We don't really have any surpluses, so it's finding it all. Thanks.
That was a good sobering speech, but thank you. Yeah, I think so. We'll come at the end of the day. We're going to have to come back and decide which of these pieces here. I have to say a little bit here on this. I think, a lot of these things are all obviously very, very valuable, and I think the Wi-Fi upgrade is probably a good example of one of those ones where it's probably possible to find other ways of funding it. That may not, because those may have some caveats. It is one of those funny things that people are now making decisions of where they go based on whether or not there's free Wi-Fi and fast Wi-Fi available. So, I'm assuming there's some work done looking at some of these things to say, is there a payback in terms of just getting people into our facilities and things coming into that, and that would help drive some of the validation of some of those costs. And the other thing because I think these are all obviously very valid requests, and looking at maybe in this year how we carve off some action items. And I thought Ms. Wilmot made a point there. I mean, can we move the playground master plan into the overall master plan, move that forward, but at the same time actually do some work, right? Start doing a showcase playground and trying to identify one that we can start funding some of that money into and working on some of those things. So those are, in my mind, I'm playing around like, how do we actually go about that? Can we just do a project where we're doing some protection of the really most endangered parts of Cattle Point in the short term while we're working out some of the larger pieces questions? Those are, I think, things that we're going to have to struggle with a little bit in terms of how we're funding. Maybe not the big stuff, but maybe we can take some more low-hanging fruit and target some funding at some of those pieces. So, but we'll come back ultimately within the broader budget picture to that. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just quickly, just want to make it clear, these three priorities that we've identified are very true, but this was based on the fact that Carnarvon Park master plan was going to get completed, and that was the overarching priority. So these are the three, yes, but that was in with Carnarvon Park being the overarching kind of goal we're shooting towards.
Okay, thanks.
Just want to make that clear for everybody else. Okay.
Yep. And certainly there are a number of projects that are underway, obviously, as well. Anybody else? Okay. Oh, yes.
Thank you, Esther or Ms. Patterson. We haven't formally met. I really thank you for your comments, and I thank you all, Council and Mayor, for the job that you're doing. I guess I very quickly want to state that Parks and Recreation are so undervalued in terms of the health and well-being of a community with respect to the challenges around mental health and well-being and people having personal contact with each other on a day-to-day basis. And I think Monterey Center is an example of how important that is for people to meet face-to-face and be together. You can't measure the value of people being together out of their homes, in their own backyards, but out at parks and playgrounds. And the upkeep of parks and playgrounds, we see the maintenance costs that come from Mr. Hyde Lade. Maintaining a park and playground as opposed to repairing or replacing a roof or a parking lot and things like that at our rec centers. In the long term, the investment of playground for families to come together to create community, and Windsor Park is an amazing opportunity within our community to bring it together. So I apologize, I just couldn't not speak. So I thank you for the time.
Thanks a second. And I think it's time for us to go on. There's probably the fees and pieces here are. I'm not expecting us to delve into these line by line or anything else, but is there anything you want to highlight, Mr. Herman?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I wasn't going to go through these line by line, just to note the changes are highlighted in yellow, save for the last page. There's some highlighted costs there, but there's a bunch of zeros. That was something I didn't catch with the filming rates. There's no increases to admissions represented here. We're still on the high end of the regional average. However, it's been since 2013 that we've had any adjustments in admission rates, and that's something that we'll need to look at as one of our potential items to address if council in future wants to see our net come down. We do hear anecdotally that it's ourselves, Saanich and Panorama, I believe, are the sort of the high three in the region, and we've all been sort of holding the line for the last 5 years or so. We have heard anecdotally that there might be some movement in Saanich, so that might make things easier down the road to address that. But so I just wanted to note that in a general sense, but certainly if there are any questions on any of these fees.
I believe there was something you were going to highlight about there's no change of fees to some of the preschool pieces. Maybe you can just highlight that, and then Councillor Green had a question.
To licensed childcare, and I'd maybe ask if Mr. Meikle can address the childcare fees and the subsidy.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have a page number to refer to?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Page 32 has got some fees and charges comparisons of just the out-of-school care, which is one aspect of our licensed care programs. So a couple of pieces just on no changes to those or no increases in fees for those programs. Firstly, you would recognize that it was raised as a concern, I guess you could say, from Commission in last year's budget and in provisional as well. So I think hearing some messages there was important to maintain those fees. And also the provincial government, as most probably will be aware of, done a number of different granting initiatives this past year for daycare and licensed care programs. To be fair, we're still sorting our way through all of that. It's a complex process, those grants. So a couple that we're eligible for are one to add program enhancements, they're called. So those are some of the lessons and other things we add to our out-of-school care program. So kids are taking dance lessons and art, and actually they're going to take some tennis lessons coming up, those kind of things. And then a fee reduction program as well. So what's advertised as our fees right now, there's a note you'll see here that the child care operating funding comes off of that for parents, so they're paying less than what's advertised here. So now my hesitancy there, it's a little complicated. It doesn't apply to all ages. There are certain age ranges that those apply to, but the other side of that, on those grants, it is quite administratively heavy, and does have quite a administrative load for us to do that. Just this last week had to do some of the accounting piece, and it literally took 2 staff pretty much 2 full days to sort through. So there are some pieces of that are a bit challenging, but working through, and I think certainly seeing some benefits to parents, hopefully.
Thank you. I have Councillor Green and Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you very much, through you, Chair. And Mr. Herman, thank you for the overall overview around fees and charges. My question was why we hadn't contemplated anything on page 23 for some of those services, why we hadn't contemplated an increase. But I think you've partially explained why. And on the childcare piece, thank you, Mr. Meikle, and I very much support childcare, so I support that position, that policy position on no fee increases there. But I was just thinking about some of the other fees, and so Ray, so it looks like we might be faced with a rise down the road if Saanich makes a move. Then, thank you.
Yeah, through the chair. I mean, we have proposed increases for rentals and things like that. It's just the drop in admission rates that we've left alone. Those were the ones that were really, if you recall, back when we went from GST to HST, some departments decided to eat that, and some decided to pass on the increase. That was prior to my time in Oak Bay, but the decision was made to pass on the increase, which bumped our adult admission rate to $7, which was the highest in the region. And that sort of coincided with 2011, 2012 being in the tank. We took advantage of going back to the GST to pull that out and bring us down. Our adult admission rate went to $6.75, which was equal to Saanich and Panorama. Now, I'm not going to say that was the only reason that things spiked. We put in the turnstiles. That really helped. There was a number of things that were done, but there's some sensitivity. And not only are we dependent on people's disposable income being spent with us, we're also in a region where there are 7 departments within a pretty tight geographic space, and there is competition there. So we're really aware of what each other does. And we know that our competition held the line because they were, we attract a lot of folks from outside our borders, and our neighboring departments are not running that up the flagpole as a source of pride. They're doing what they can to bring those people back. That's just kind of the yin and yang of how things go, but we need to stay on top of what's going on there. So that's why we've not proposed any changes to those fees for the last 5 years. But if there's going to be some movement, I think we need to go there, just because we're continuing to absorb additional labor costs, and that's 80% of a $13 million budget. There's been a lot of talk today about how do we recoup some of those costs. That would certainly be one potential way.
Just one more quick question. How much of an impact did CARSA at UVic have on the recreation center, or did it have any impact at all?
Very little. There was an initial blip, and after that, we noticed nothing. The feedback we get from folks is it's expensive. You have to pay to park. It really hasn't impacted us at all.
So that's good news. Thanks, Ray.
Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks. How is the proposed childcare spaces that SD61 is thinking of putting in at some undisclosed place yet, hopefully? How's that going to affect our childcare spaces, or do you think it will?
We've had quite a bit of discussion around that, and we've been in discussion with the school district. They've approached us on whether there's interest to partner with them on running whatever they decide to implement. We are not concerned at all on the full daycare. We have a lot of demand there and a big wait list, so we think that would be a good thing. The before and after school care is something that we're not 100% full, so we're not convinced that there's demand in the community for that amount of additional supply. But I know Mr. Meikle has been in some meetings with folks from the school district, and we're kind of right now in the mode of just waiting to see what they're going to do. But if those discussions come up again, we'll be talking about that.
Thank you.
Councillor Appleton. And I do want to wrap this up by 8 tonight. I was hoping 7:30, but we'll go for 8. So we'll keep it, not to slow you down. You haven't had much talking time yet. So
Thank you, Worship. I'll keep it short. Just a quick question, just in terms of charges for Monterey Center, and this is my woeful ignorance because I live a block away, but when it talks about parking for Monterey Center charges, is that a yearly fee? Is that like when it says an itemized fee, it's $12.75. Is that a yearly fee for parking at Monterey?
Mr. Meikle?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. Yes, that is an annual fee, and what that does for members for some of those events that go, so I'll backtrack a little bit. Monterey's got a 2-hour time limit in their parking lot. It gives them an additional 2 hours, so it makes it a 4-hour situation, so they are not dealing with tickets for being at some of those events.
Okay. just one other question.
Yeah, please.
Just with regards to the charges for film production, I just kind of, I'm not sure whose sort of responsibility center it lands in to sort of evaluate and revise those filming charges. So that's sort of a question there. But I find, I note that none of those rates have changed in the last 5 years. I find them personally to be extremely low. So I'm just wondering kind of whether there's a process to revise those and sort of, and look at what those, look at how we might increase those for better cost recovery.
So that's Mr. Meikle. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. We are currently going through a review of those. What we've learned to this point is similar to many other things. The film industry is very competitive. So we're in the ballpark with other municipalities and their charges, is my understanding. And that's where these were based off in the first place. And so it's one of those high-risk opportunities, I guess you say, where if we raise the prices too much, film companies won't come here necessarily. So, and that I've heard directly from them. They already will avoid or try to avoid, try to minimize the time that they're on a road, for example, so that it doesn't take a full day and then they're not having to pay a full day's fee for that street use request. Or similar for parking at the Oak Bay Marina, they'll make sure they're in and out of there in less than 12 hours or less than a day, so that they're not having to pay for. As big as some of these film production companies are, in my first year here, I've been a bit surprised at how much they actually penny pinch. And so, and I've said that to them too, so I'm not afraid to say that here. But it's a very interesting one. So we're working with the Victoria Film Commission to see where is some flexibility there, where can we move and keep ourselves in that marketplace.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ney.
Thank you, through you, Chair. A couple questions to Mr. Herman. First off, I was just wondering, have you seen any impact on our usage of the rec center with the new private fitness club that's opened up? It may be early days, but just wondering.
Through the chair, not to date.
And then the second question is, in a way, I like to see that. I mean, I know you're always trying to weigh up, your revenues and accessibility to the rec center. But for me, I like to see that this hasn't had to move so far too much, because like what Suzanne was saying, it's important people can use our facilities, of course. So anyhow, the question I have is, with regards to individuals with limited, like there's such a nice variety of passes and stuff to the rec center. And one that I don't see here that I'm not sure, I was wondering if you could speak to Mr. Herman. It has to do with individuals with limited incomes. How is that? And what does it look like in comparison to other rec centers in the region?
I'll answer briefly and then defer to Mr. Meikle. He's more familiar with that program, but we do participate in a LIFE program that's regional. All the departments participate in that, and I'll ask him to speak to the details of it.
Sure, thank you, through the chair. We're regionally currently going through a review of that LIFE program. It stands for Leisure Involvement for Everyone, and people that can register or apply and fall under a certain income level get some options, really. 52 free drop-ins, options to buy half-price annual passes that would extend those number of drop-ins, a number of coupons, so to speak, for percentage off, 50% off a program registration, etc. So regionally, and we've all participated in this regionally, that we have spent the last 5 months going through a review, collecting information through surveys, focus groups with various stakeholders, surveys with participants, and we should be getting those results in June as to what that looks like and where that program moves forward into the future. So I think a common theme in general has been there's a need for more than 52 drop-ins, and there's a need for looking at where those cutoff lines lie in terms of the low-income applications. So we'll see where that goes, but certainly
yeah,
some changes.
That's some feedback I've had. There's some on limited income who were we're not, the 52 doesn't do it, like 52 drops for a year doesn't cut it. But I was wondering, what does ours look like in comparison to other rec centers right now?
Very similar in many ways. I'm most familiar with Saanich, and it's quite similar to Saanich in terms of the offerings there. Victoria has a bit of a different model, and they years ago, through budget process, I believe they have a credit system that people can access. So they have quite a different model. They're probably the one outlier that's quite different. The other process that I think is quite popular out of the program is the ability to purchase an annual pass, which is unlimited access, unlimited drop-ins, so to speak, at 50%. So what we often see, and they could do that with other passes as well, people will use those 52 drop-ins and then apply some of the coupons, the 50% off, to buy a 4-month pass or a 5-week, whatever works for them. So options are there. And as I say, I think we'll see some of those change and come through the process out of the recommendations here. Yep.
Councillor Selka.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be quick. One little question relating to fees and charges. I recall about a year ago getting about 1,000 emails relating to baseball, Carnarvon and Mariners baseball rates. But this year I got nothing. What happened?
Through the chair, we had some meetings with Carnarvon baseball and to evaluate the sweat equity that they were putting into the field, their fields. And while we were undergoing those discussions, we agreed to roll the fees back to what had been charged previously. We're at the point now, and I probably should have already done this, just haven't got to it, but we'll give them a letter. Essentially, Mr. Hidley did really good analysis on the dollar value of their contribution of the maintenance of the fields compared to ours. And we're going to we're going to use the figure of 75%, which I think is a little high, but it's in their favor, of the value of the work that they put into the field. So we're going to soon give them a letter that says, starting next season, they will be charged the regular rates less 75% reduction. But in that letter, it'll be essentially an agreement that says you will do these duties, we will do these duties. If that changes in the future, we reserve the right to adjust the fee accordingly.
Thank you. No other fee questions here? All right. Very good. Nope. Okay. I guess we're moving on to the final piece here. These are the capital projects, sort of a continuation of where we were before, but it's broken down in some of the details. I don't, in the interest of time, don't want to walk through each one of these per se. I'm assuming people have read through them, but if there's questions on them, and I think there's a couple, perhaps we can just highlight why and where they're coming from. And I note that in this it doesn't have that 5-year breakdown, doesn't have other pieces. So this is, as I understand it, the ask of net new capital projects for 2019.
Correct, Your Worship. And I should note that you will see this list does not include those items that were in the Commission's strategic priorities. So if Council wishes to include those, those would be additions. There's one other.
There's a line there that has resurface Oak Bay High School track with no dollar attached to it. So I was just curious if that was.
Yes, thank you. That's what I was looking for. The folks who are putting on the 2020 Francophone Games have been talking to the school district in an effort to expedite resurfacing of the track. There's been some suggestion from those folks that the municipality should participate. As of right now, I don't have any dollar figure, or they're still getting an updated cost of what that would be worth, and then I don't know how much they expect the municipality would contribute. I felt that it was something that should be noted here, but I don't have any additional information to provide at this time.
Thank you. we've gone through some of these already, obviously, but are there any other questions from commission or council here on terms of the specific? Yeah, Matt. Will.
It's okay. Yeah, just in respect to Carnarvon Park, again, one of the reasons I joined the commission was to have a voice in that, since I live 30 seconds away from it. The 15-year number that was tossed out in the previous, back to the initial page 13 there. I understand the master plan is being completed. It should be done in the next year, but I didn't see any funding moving forward for that in any year. And then I saw the 15-year plus for that project to be completed. I know it's a massive project, I understand that, but I can imagine it can be done in phases. And then we're going to be pumping $10,000 into the pickleball courts / tennis courts, because it's going to take several years to complete the Carnarvon Park plan, or Carnarvon Park upgrade, whatever you want to call it. So I'm just curious, like, I don't know, as a commission, we haven't really discussed a true timeline on it, and I understand that, but it's of grave concern to me that there's no kind of figure. Maybe we can attach a figure to it because we don't know what the whole plan looks like. I understand that, but
Why don't I put that to staff, because I think it's a valid point. We have a plan coming forward that we may or may not approve and may or may not do something with, but theoretically there would be some capital attached to that over the coming years, and doesn't seem to be reflected in the capital plan. Can you just address that?
Correct, Your Worship, and that's because until we receive the plan, it would be total guesswork as to how much money we would put in there. Part of the deliverable of the report is to provide priority phasing of what projects would be done first. So if, the biggest ticket item in that plan is going to be the cost of a new building. If that's in the first year versus year 5 or 6 or 7, it's going to change what we would put forward. So that plan is to come forward. The steering committee will review, and it's going to be presented to council on the 29th of this month and the commission. But even the 15 years is a total guess from staff, and we tried to be conservative because it's going to be dependent on available funding to complete what's suggested there. It's not certainly up to staff whether or not council might want to borrow to expedite or whatever. Those are options that can be discussed later on, but right now we're a little bit in the dark for the next week or two.
Okay, fair enough. Steve, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. Just on the note of the 10,000 for the pickleball courts at Carnarvon, we're dealing with some safety issues there. Roots have come up through the ground, and so again, not knowing how long things will take, it's an immediate pressing need that would impact this summer's play. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I notice a lot of these are things breaking and needing to be broken things needing replacement, as opposed to strategic projects to achieve certain goals. So we have these here, and I think it's obviously we're not making final decisions here today, but it'd be helpful for us to give direction to staff to come back if we are interested in adding, certainly to have some funding for some of the other pieces that were raised. We have this list here, and I'm gonna just put this in there because the number is so strikingly close that I have to kind of flag it. The total general requests funded by taxes, which is the first part, is $221,950. Our 2018 overage in the net was $221,550. It's almost to the dollar the same amount of money, and so you sort of look at that and think, is there no way that we could maybe shift some of those funds over as part of our? I know we're not answering that question today. That's a policy of council, but I think we're going to have to make that decision a little bit about how we look at some of these costs, because that $221,000 is 1% of taxes, just that one piece. So it adds a percentage onto our tax bill of everybody. So, we have this list here that'll come into our budgeting piece. I'm looking to really probably as much to council here at this point in terms of adding any other pieces to be included coming forward to the broader budget discussion. Councillor Braithwaite.
Just to some of the information that Mr. Fairburns was giving us in regards to the piece that needs to be completed for the 2 parks that you talked about. I'm wondering if we need to add $5,000 into the budget for something like that, if that's a reasonable amount that we would put in.
And to be clear, that wouldn't be part of this capital section, but it would be sort of another line item in there as a project-based piece. I believe. I think we are treating these as. I'm just looking at here. I think they're. No, it's okay. I think it's the right time to raise the question. And I think it's a good one. I think probably if we could have that as a line item for consideration as part of the budget to finish off that part of the reporting, I think we need to have that information. Is an important one that we can add. Don't get excited. It's not final yet, but Councillor Zelka?
Yes, when we finish going through the last section titled Urban Forestry, then I may have a few more questions and possibly some more budget items. Thank you.
Okay. If there's any other questions on this section, if not, I'll go to that last section now and we can get to that. Councillor Green? No?
Sorry, for the last section.
For the last section? Okay. All right, Mr. Heideley, I think this is to you then, this last section. Do you want to give a quick overview of this portion?
Sure, yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Quick overview of where we are with the urban forest strategy right now. So we kicked off in 2018. One of the big pieces was the updating of the tree protection bylaw. For the most part, that's complete. It should be coming to commission with the major points for review next month, I think, Ray? And then on to committee of the whole. So with that piece, there will be additional information added to the website. We'll take that opportunity to do that then in regards to what those updates are and other urban forestry information to the website. In regards to the tree planting, we have met our targets for 2018, well on our way for 2019, even with the slowdown in February with the snow. The natural area management framework for Uplands Park has been completed, and I know that Wiley has presented to the Parks Rec and Culture Commission. I think that'll be coming to council too. I will take just a moment just to recognize the volunteers that work in all of our parks, because without them we would not be able to do what we do. That's Matt down at Trafalgar Park and Uplands. It's the Christina Johnson-Dean at Anderson Hill. It's Carol Davies at Brighton Trail and Native Plant Park. We've got a group now working at Queen's Park. It's truly tremendous, and it's really comes out to hundreds of thousands of dollars of value. I think if you read the FOOP annual report, there's an actual dollar value just attached to Uplands in itself. In regards to the community engagement in 2018, we did do a seminar down at Windsor Pavilion that was well attended by about 80 people and had 4 different presenters, which was great. We had Tree Appreciation Day and we had Camas Day. We plan the same for 2019. We're working very closely with Public Works, Engineering, Building and Planning. Great relationship there. In regards to one of the things that has been implemented into the urban forest strategy already, and that are the canopy cover targets for new developments. We've had very little pushback, surprisingly, on that. I think one of the projects to watch is the new building that's being constructed by Abstract at the corner of Bowker and Cadbury Bay, where we're looking at 20% canopy cover. So I know that some of that canopy cover will be out on the municipal frontage, but it'll be interesting to see how that progresses, and I expect it to be a success. So, and then in regards to what the municipal arborist and myself are doing, we're more involved with building and planning in regards to reviewing all of the new plans, etc., and making comment on landscape. So for the most part, those pieces are working very well. Right at the bottom, there's an additional tree water small tree pruner. That was added this year, so we had a nighttime tree water to capture the additional trees that we had planted. We're beginning to use a lot more water bags, so that will cut down the frequency of how we have to visit those trees, how often we have to go and water the trees. And also the small tree water is also doing the early structural pruning of those trees. That'll carry into the proactive tree maintenance program when the trees become a little bit larger and they won't be able to do that. So this year we've already started with 2 months of tree planting. We've got well over 150 trees into the ground already. So I anticipate the November, December will do very well again. Hopefully it'll be approved. We'll be able to expand our tree maintenance program so we get the municipality on a successful cyclical pruning program, which will probably be in the 8-year range. We do plan, as I mentioned, more community outreach. We were fortunate to purchase over 200 oaks that are a nice size that we plan on using as an event this year for the community to begin to encourage people to begin to plant trees on private lands using Gary Oak. So we're going to have some sort of Gary Oak Day, maybe towards the fall, could be in association with Tree Appreciation Day. We're working with the golf courses. I don't know if you've been down to the corner by Uplands Golf Course, or not Uplands Golf Course, Victoria Golf Course. You'll see about 20 new oaks there. The corner has been cleared, so that was a bit of a joint project with Paul Robertson. We're meeting Brian Russell Brian Ewell at Uplands to just review their long-term tree strategy for the golf course. They're Audubon certified, and they're looking at turning things back to more of a Gary Oak type course, which it already is. So we'll be doing a bunch of stuff with them, and that's really where we are. I will make reference that in regards to the funding for natural areas, that Whitey Thomas has put together the grant for $101,000, an ask for 3 years. If in the case that was unsuccessful, there is an ask of $35,000 for 2019 in the budget to maintain the level of work that we have been doing there. And the municipality is responsible for removing all of the debris that comes out of all of the invasive species, comes out of our natural areas, and it's a tremendous volume that is being removed. So that's just a general overview of where we are. Personally, I think it's working well. I think that the bylaw will be kind of a key piece and a key guiding piece of the direction that we can continue to go.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Heidley? Councillor Zelka? You did warn me. It's all good.
I did. Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you very much to the Parks Department, a part of Parks, Rec and Culture, for this great report. It's always good to hear the wonderful successes every year. So I did want to ask a few quick questions, if I could, please. If the Habitat Stewardship Program funding doesn't come available, so you're anticipating an extra $35K added to this year's budget?
Through the chair, that's correct, Councillor Zelka.
And how is it looking for that funding, or do we know?
Yeah, I'm going to let Matt Fairbarns comment on that. He's well connected with, more connected than I am with the federal government. Matt?
Every year I have conversations sub rosa with the folks in Ottawa, and I can't tell you exactly what they say, but the general trend right now is the current government would like to continue to provide strong support for the Species at Risk programs, which includes the Habitat Stewardship Program. It's very useful to support a high-profile program when you may be faced with an awful lot of strong, controversial environmental issues in your government. And so I expect that we will see the Habitat Stewardship Program receive continued funding this year. Specific to our application with the Habitat Stewardship Program, I don't have internal knowledge of that one because there is a bit of a wall there. However, I do know the ranking process they're using, and it's, I think, in the last 5 or 10 years when we've been receiving money from them, we've ended up being always within the top 10% of projects in terms of ranking for Pacific and Yukon region. So I'd be very positive about it.
That's great. If I may ask you a related question, I recall I can't think of council at the last session or the session before. City of Metchosin, District Metchosin has just brought forward some sort of a vegetative type study that they want the CRD to be involved with, relating to I think federal funding, having to do with the fire loads in our parks. That might possibly be linked in here, maybe at some point. Just something to consider.
Yeah, that's a completely different funding envelope.
Absolutely, agreed. And also the province, since we're entering a drought season, there's a continuing concern about, as you no doubt know, about interface fires, and so there is funding available provincially as well, relating to finding trees to plant that won't burn so easily. Yes, but anyway. So
I will mention, Councillor Zelka, just the amount of biomass that has been taken out of the park over the last number of years has been pretty tremendous. So that has reduced the fire load somewhat. We've still got a long ways to go, though, in areas of the park for sure.
Just considering innovative ways of leveraging funding, that's all. I wanted to ask about the seminar at Windsor Park. Unfortunately, I missed it, and I don't see on the website the actual presentations. I heard the presentations were fantastic. If it's possible to have them either sent to me personally or maybe put up on the website, I would really like to get my hands on those presentations.
Absolutely. And sorry, I thought I did put them up on the website. Two of the four.
I couldn't find them.
One of the individuals was reluctant to, and that was Paul from Royal Roads.
Okay. I have one more question here. Where the heck did it go? Oh, darn. Private lands. I'm pleased to hear that you're going to be working on the engagement with respect to private lands. I do worry that, there won't be a take-up in that area, but it sounds like you have a plan in place. So I'm very pleased to see that that's moving forward. I'm also very pleased to see that we'll soon get an actual copy of the updated tree protection bylaw. I'm very much looking forward to seeing that. Is there anticipated any budget related to that moving forward, or is this really just a staff issue?
Just a staff issue.
And then the last thing related to that then is, I see that there in 2018, the staff is involved with zoning applications, building permit applications with the current tree protection bylaw. With the new tree protection bylaw, do you anticipate further or enhanced participation by the arborists with respect to building permit applications?
I can't see that changing. Where it may change in regards to his workload is the proposed reduction in what is considered a protected tree.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
And I will be really quick. I'll try and do this in 1 minute, Chris. First of all, thank you to you and all of your volunteers for the amazing work you do. I'm well aware of it, and I'm very grateful. And I just wanted to clarify, so I can tick off everything from 2018 now in the columns. I wasn't sure if they were initiatives underway or all completed, so it sounds like a lot of them are completed.
Through the chair, most are. With the exception
of
the bylaw and the updating of our municipal website, so it's current.
Thank you, Chris. And one other question. In terms of climate change mitigation, and now we know that Canada is warming faster than any other nation in the world, which is really frightening. In terms of your community engagement piece, will you be doing anything on climate change locally and how we might deal with that as residents and gardeners and so on? Thank you.
Strongly possible.
Okay.
I will recommend that, I can't pronounce the fellow's name, but one of the PhDs who runs the Urban Forest Program at UBC is speaking at the Cook Street Activity Center on April 17th. He is phenomenal. He's an incredible presenter. He has done an awful lot of work in this area, and I encourage everybody to go. It's by donation, and he's a world-class speaker.
Thank you for that. Councillor Appleton. Don't ask him how ticked off he is again. That's not.
Absolutely not. Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Hidlay. In the report, Met does mention exploring the possibility of Tree Canada funding, and I'm just wondering, have we explored that in the past, and is that sort of a high priority to look at? Because I've got some knowledge of it, and it seems like it's potentially a good fit, but I wasn't sure whether there's any obstacles that were in our way to exploring that.
Through the chair, thank you, Council Lapperton. We were the recipient of I think 66,000 or 6250 this year. It used to be money that we got from BC Hydro. BC Hydro now has turned their funding portion over to Tree Canada. We've applied directly through them, which we have for the last number of years. They're limiting the cap to 5,000 the following year to supplement tree planting programs.
All right. Thank you. Okay, any other questions on this section? I'm not seeing any. Okay, back to the budget. We're going to have this all come back to our piece here. Mr. Jones, procedurally here, obviously we're not doing any approvals tonight, but we do want to make sure we give as much clarity as possible to bring this back.
Thank you, Your Worship. So staff are working on a bit of a decision-making matrix for you that we will bring forward next week, a week today, and that will include information that you've heard today. It will ask you, are there projects, again, for all of the departments that you're interested in pursuing, and it will also ask you to have a chat about funding sources for each one of those. So the plan is to capture as much as we can what we heard tonight and have that information available for you so you can make those decisions. But again, I think just something to reiterate that so on next week you will hear from all the other departments. So from fire, police, engineering, public works, planning, and they too will have the list of projects. So you've got a challenging task ahead of you, as well as to think about how you might want to deal with some of your infrastructure deficits. So all of that information is intended to be in front of you next Wednesday, and hopefully will enable you to make decisions that would allow us to then complete the financial plan.
Right, and to be clear, we have 2 more budget meetings, so we'll get through as much of that as we can on Wednesday, and then the following Wednesday again, we do this again. And really at that point, we're trying to make a recommendation on the budget, and that'll come to bylaw and first and second reading, etc. Is that okay? Just so everybody understands the timelines that we're dealing with here on these pieces. So, is there anything else that anybody wants to add before we adjourn this meeting? Councillor Green.
In less than 30 seconds. I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and to staff and to the commission members. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? We're good. Well, I just want to express on behalf of council our appreciation for all the work that the commission does. It's a lot, and it helps when we get these bits of information to know that it's had this look over. And I also really want to express our appreciation for the staff. We could not afford to have the parks rec and culture that we have in our community if the staff weren't as awesome as they are. These recovery rates, this ability to run our parks and rec facilities in a business-like manner, in a way that really attracts people to come, makes our community that much very livable, makes it very attractive. Are all really positive. We don't get a chance to say it very often, so here we are at a shared meeting. So thank you very much for all that staff and the commission do every day, every week, every month. So thank you for that. We have a lot to think about, and I just need a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Opposed, unopposed. Thank you, everyone.